I would like to begin this session by a short practice. It is voluntary. If you would like to participate, it will help us with an actual demonstration of what I'm going to talk about. So sit comfortably, feel your feet on the ground, shoulders relaxed, breathe out. Relax and focus on something in the present moment. You may close your eyes. Feel your breath pass through your nostrils. Listen to the sounds around you. Mentally scan your body from head to toe. Observe the sensations. When your mind wanders, notice it and return to the breath passing through the nostrils. We can begin with our conversational approach here. I think Jivasu has already introduced, so I will skip this slide completely and directly go to the session. Some reason, again, the Zoom is not detecting my passport. Here. So are you able to see my screen now?
Yes, quite clearly.
Yes. And this is a different slide, right? So the slides are also moving.
That's right.
Okay. So I'll describe what we just did. We talked about a variety of topics that are of critical relevance uh, in the first session by Dr. Shiv. Now, in this practice, we focused our attention to our breathing and to some sounds in our environment. So we did something called attentional focus. It is critical to transformation. The session today, or the focus of this conference is transformation, science of transformation. What do we want to transform? First thing is attention. Attention is the exact opposite of mind wandering. So ordinarily, our mind focuses at a topic or a particular sensation for a few moments, and then it begins to wander. That's its natural behavior, let's say. But attention is to bring it back to either that sound or to your breathing or to a bodily sensation. So we did practice what we are going to talk about in today's session and a bit more on the neurobiology of transformation. What we are training is critical for making an inquiry, an informed inquiry. This is not something that you have to believe in. This is a very experimental approach. When you want to train your attention, it is critical that you focus on learning what is around you, but also what is important. Why is that the case? The reason is whatever we pay attention to grows. If you do not pay attention in classroom as a child or as a teenager, you may not learn much. A lot of learning is a direct result of paying attention. And we want to grow in experience. We want to grow in knowledge. On this slide, you see certain pictures of the brain. The left and the right hemispheres are shown here. And specific areas of the brain that were active when you were able to pay attention, and certain areas that were less active. The areas shown in the red were quite active when you were able to pay attention. For instance, the frontal areas, we call them prefrontal cortex. You don't have to worry about remembering the specific names, but the frontal part. And I also showed you or made you pay attention to the sound. So a little bit of sound areas, but mostly focusing on where you're situated. So your spatiotemporal dynamics were engaged, but you will notice that maximum activity or shown by the red is in the frontal area and in the temporal area, a little bit of spatial orientation area. So our attention is critical for certain factors. Why? When we want to train our body, mind is also critical. You can't be a sports person, you can't be a surgeon, you can't be a police officer, you can't be a soldier if you don't train your body and mind together. Attention training is critical. Why do we want to do that? In the previous session, Dr. Shiv mentioned about autopilot. We want to take charge of our lives. We want to better manage our emotions and thoughts. And it's critical that we learn about how to do this. Training our body has a direct impact and has direct implications for training our minds. You cannot train your minds without training your body. Why are these important? Because we want enhanced well-being that eventually results in transformation. So it's a journey. It may happen quickly. It may take some time. It depends on a variety of factors. And we will look into those in today's session. Why training our body? What is this body? Why training our mind? What is this mind? And essentially training our brains, because I'm a neuroscientist, I'll touch upon what brain is and how to train our brains in this session and how they're all connected with the possibilities that we all have for transformation. Are my slides going well now? Can you see the next slide?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes, no problem.
Thank you. So just for a confirmation, at times I don't see what you are seeing, right? So what is body? Our body is from nature. It is a reflection of nature. It is not separate from nature. It's very important to recognize this, not only from a philosophical knowledge perspective, but also from experiential point of view. When you are exposed to environmental cues, the body responds. Now, our life begins from a single cell, divides into many, and carries genetic and historical information. This forms the body. Dr. Shiv touched upon these factors in greater detail in the previous session. I wouldn't be getting into that, mostly for the sake of focusing on my part of the content. As many of you might be aware, or some of you might be new to this content, regarding how single cell divides into many, a zygote that becomes an embryo, develops into a fetus, and finally a baby. But remember, it's a reflection of nature. Our body carries information. It carries a variety of information. The body carries memory. Two kinds of memory I'm touching here, but a few more, but primarily genetic and epigenetic. So when we say genetic, essentially this information is in the nucleus of each cell. And this contains these specific bodies called chromosomes. These are tightly packed DNA molecules along with protein molecules. So this information is passed from generations to generation and is primarily biological and is, let's say, biochemical and is highly conserved. A lot of the activity in the cell is to make copies of the DNA and to make sure those copies are done properly. As we grow older, at times there are errors in that. Dr. Shiv mentioned that touched upon the topic on mutations. There's another kind of information that we are carrying. It is called epigenetic. This is not merely genetic, but also episodic information, and it is also inherited. So history of our ancestors. Just a decade back, we learned that we carry information from previous generations, not just one, maybe more than one, maybe several generations. So researchers have traced markers of gene repression through cell division and showed that sperm and eggs transmit a memory of gene repression to embryos. So not just expression, but what was not passed on. Now, the information on the right side of the screen is all from scientific research, actually screenshots from research papers, where, for instance, in 2022, scientists discovered that epigenetic memory transfers through generations to grand offspring in model organisms. So we have studied this not only in certain animals, but also in humans. We have data for this. I would welcome questions or comments or even further communication if anybody's interested on these topics from a scientific point of view. The body has other types of memory too. We call it immune memory. So history of our ancestors, not merely genetic or episodic that we inherit, but we are also actively creating new memories, consciously and unconsciously. The entire field of immunology looks at this. People who are experts on this topic can tell you how certain types of immunoglobulins, here shown on the right side of the screen, labeled as IgA, IgG, IgM, IgG, D, A, and E. So all these are different types of immunoglobulins, certain types of protein molecules that are passed on from the mother to the newborn. For instance, IgA are secretory passive antibodies from colostrum and breast milk, and it survives digestion and lines mucosal membranes. IgG is the only maternal antibody that is passively acquired by the fetus during pregnancy. They provide immunity for 4 to 6 months. So A lot of work that has occurred and shown how we carry information, and not just the one that we inherited, but also the new information that we create. Now, what is the brain? Does the brain also contain them, right? My area of expertise. So brain is composed of neurons and other types of cells. Here I'm showing you on the right side a schematic diagram of a neuron, essentially a cell body that contains axon and dendrites and how it connects to other neurons. Neurons are simply nerve cells. They connect with each other and form a network. When they form a network, they work together. Like any collective society or any society where individuals get together and work together. Neurons that work together actually are developing stronger bonds. We have a saying in a topic called neuroplasticity. I will describe what it is in a moment. Neurons that wire together, fire together. So different areas of the brain also have specialized functions, as seen on the diagram on the right side. It's color coded here. Our brain is not colored. It's essentially gray and white. But for our learning, different areas that are involved in a variety of functions. On the right side is the frontal part, says frontal cortex, is right here. And then other areas, somatic motor association area, motor cortex, visual area, and Wernicke's area, and auditory cortex. I did scan healthy human brains in non-invasive brain imaging setups across the globe in many countries. So I can share some interesting insights if anybody's interested later on. Our brain also carries information. It processes information. It stores information, both short and long term. It learns about the environment, but it also forgets. Remember, memory is useful, but it's also remember that it is critical to not retain certain types of memories or certain types of information. Why? The purpose is to protect the body. The purpose is to ensure your survival and reproduction. So from a biological standpoint, it does its job quite well. It's a highly conserved and a highly efficient system. You might be smiling, why do I call it efficient system? Well, from a biological perspective, the brain is encased in a great environment, bathed in cerebrospinal fluid and covered by a wide range of protective systems. A neurologist will tell you, a neurosurgeon will tell you how important this is. The interesting thing is, even if it protects the body and ensures survival and reproduction, that's not the end of it. The brain is trainable. What does that mean? It changes in response to changes in the body and with changes in the environment. Two things. Whatever is happening here, the brain is responding. Experience of stress. So if you fall sick, there you have any system in your body that is not functioning well, the brain will try and respond, both unconsciously and consciously. So this is what we call conscious and unconscious processing. But there are a lot of cues from the environment that the brain tries to protect or learn from. For instance, meditation can boost cortical thickness in the brain and prevent the thinning of it. So in response to a training, as I said, trainability, there is increase in gray matter. This was done in 2005 at Massachusetts General Hospital at Harvard. And this was a very interesting discovery that the actual structure changes in response to meditation practice. Now, we talked about the body. Brain is part of the body. But there is something else. We don't experience our brain. We experience our minds. What is mind? Mind is what we experience, feel, and perceive. There are certain aspects of the mind. For the sake of understanding the mind, we divide them into, let's say, 3 types. Perception. Right now, you're able to perceive the sound, you're able to see the screen, you're detecting and assessing the environment. Other things are called emotions, to assess and interact with the environment. Are you feeling pleasant? Are you feeling bored? Are you feeling excited? Your body is sensing the temperature, the sound, the light, and a wide range of other inputs as well. So this is in your conscious awareness as well as certain unconscious inputs. And finally, cognition. You are paying attention, you're learning, and you're operating or manipulating the environment to ensure that learning happens more efficiently. So when we talk about the mind, there are two aspects essentially, or we experience it in this way. One is the responsiveness to internal and external needs, right? As well as relatedness. So this is more for the purpose of making sure that you or an individual or an organism has a connection to the environment, but also to your own experience. You don't just experience and forget about it. You have a memory of your experience. Memory continues, at least for this lifespan, or let's say a duration of your lifespan, you have some memory. You learned mathematics, you acquired a skill, you learned a language, you remember those words, you start using them in such a way that it becomes second nature. I'm learning French, so I'm making a lot of effort in memorizing new words. But I want that to become a continuity. And I will learn through my first-hand experience of how it becomes a continuity so that I feel the connection. So relatedness also plays a big role there. Essentially, the mind is carrying information. Perception is critical because it's important in concept formation. Now look at the screen on the screen on the right side, and you will see the two kinds of pictures there. The first one on the left, you see facial expressions. It's not just visual input. You have a meaning out of this, right? A disgust face or a surprise face, perhaps an angry face. Another picture shows you, a village scene, right? There might be some people who will primarily focus not on the village scene, but the eyes or the other animals or the landscape. So these are concepts. Secondly, emotions, as I mentioned, primary and secondary emotions. We all experience this, and this is the information our mind carries. And I mentioned just a moment ago, cognition, that refers to attention, memory, learning, decision making, a wide range of cognitive capacities. Humans actually tend to have this in very advanced format. We are able to focus our attention. We are able to train our attention. We are able to memorize. And not only memorize, we are able to memorialize, which means keep a memory for a long duration, longer than the capacity of the brain to store or the survival of a brain. We have made symbol systems, we have made language, we have books, we have ideas that have lasted centuries or maybe millennia. There's learning that we can transfer, and we make decisions based on all of these, not just cognition, but emotions and perception. Why am I bringing all of this today? Because the body, the brain, and the mind, all of them carry information. And it's not just that this is a concept. We all feel this information. We create new information. It forms the basis of our experience. And it's actually a gift. It is an extension of nature. Remember, I mentioned body is a reflection of nature. So in order to do anything, we must begin here. On the slide here, I'm showing you a homunculus, which is actually a map of our body onto our brain. And this is scientific work that shows that the representation, both sensory and motor, which means how those sensations are felt and how differentially they are felt. Secondly, motor, how differentially you act, or you have the capacity to act based on that information. This is a very interesting concept where our experience of the world is interactive as far as the neuroscience is concerned. But the gist is body, brain, and mind carry information, and we must begin where we have this information. Why is this relevant to our session today? Partly because information is in cells and neurons, and it unfolds as time and space allows. So you may not immediately know what that information is just by looking at a cell under a microscope. You may be able to see the DNA structure. You may be able to tease apart certain types of molecular structures using electron microscopy. But how it unfolds and creates your experience. Remember, I mentioned mind, the collective experience. The brain is the substratum. So it is experienced in a wide range of ways, including trauma. Trauma is information that is biological and psychological. It is felt at different levels. It is stored in our body and mind. In our subsequent sessions, Meera or Jivasu will touch upon these in greater details. So I wouldn't get into this, but if somebody has questions, we may be able to answer, or perhaps we will take these in greater detail in later sessions. So information is critical. Brain development has mental consequences because our brain is part of the body. It begins to form early in gestational period. Dr. Shiv touched upon this as well in his session. I looked at a variety of topics in cognitive development, and as an early biologist, I knew how molecular structures, how enzymes have a huge impact in organ formation, nervous system, as well as circulatory systems and other systems in animals. Now, teenage and young adulthood goes through radical changes in the brain. For instance, here in the diagram, I'm showing you the development of the human brain, where stage 1 brain development, where the hindbrain develops. The second stage is subcortical in the midbrain. And the third development stage is when the forebrain is developing, frontal areas, starting from the back and moving to the center, and finally the top. We also call it neocortical development, and it is still developing until the age of 25. According to some estimates, circuitry between the front and the back of the brain is developing until your late 30s. How do we know that? Partly because we studied people who consume alcohol, for instance. This was the research I learned in Sydney, Australia, that alcohol interferes with that frontal parietal networks, even in the 30s, because the brain is still developing. We know quite a bit about how substances impact neural development, but this was just an example. So emotional brain is under development, and there are exploratory dynamics of teenage years. Many of us have experienced it ourselves or seen it around us, in our children, in our neighborhoods, where teenagers are more risk-taking, they have independent ideas, freedom and rebellion, new directions, influenced by hormones. All of these are examples of how the brain development has mental consequences or behavioral consequences. This is very much how nature and environment influences us. Remember, information, central theme, information. What is happening with that information? The information changes your brain. Two types of changes occur. We call them structural and functional. Structural in the sense that the physical structure of the brain is changed as a result of experiences or memories. The more you remember something, more you repeat something, a particular part of the brain called hippocampus starts to grow in size. We know that. There was some research back in the days about London taxi drivers. They had larger hippocampi, partly because they were memorizing or they got used to those streets. Similarly, there is some new research that I saw about a decade ago, or less than a decade ago, on Sanskrit chanting or chanting certain types of sounds. In North India, they recruited these priests who have been chanting for a long time, and their brain structure was different. Secondly, functional plasticity. An undamaged area of the brain takes over the functions of a damaged area. This research was done through anatomical work, but also now through brain imaging work. When you train your brain, it can change its functions. So not just structural, but functional modifications can occur. This is all a result of continued practice, and we know both the mechanisms and the possibilities that are in front of us. Why is this relevant? Again, you may ask. Partly because mental training is a critical factor in your brain changes. We do not want to be changing our brains through chemicals. That's not a good way to change your brains. Of course, at times when you need interventions, drug interventions, or surgical interventions, they are the appropriate way, but it will not necessarily uh, imply that we should be changing our brains by those interventions. Instead, mental training is a better approach because structure governs the function and function influences the structure. We know from research that mindfulness significantly reduces anxiety even after 20 minutes of practice. So in this diagram here, I'm showing you certain areas of the brain in the color here. Anterior cingulate cortex involved in error processing, ventromedial prefrontal cortex. Sorry about the abbreviations. For me, they come very naturally. So these frontal areas, posterior cingulate cortex, and anterior insula, different parts of the brain. Don't worry about the names. I can share more if you like. So this research shows that you can train your brain by you can change your brain by mental training. Essentially, modifications in function as well as structures. Now, this has implications for our health. There's a whole discipline called mind-body medicine. Dr. Jivasu is an expert on those topics. There's a discipline called psychoneuroimmunology, where psychological and behavioral and brain structures impact your immune system. There's quite a bit of work, quite a bit of research. In fact, advanced training programs in mind-body medicine. I have visited some of these centers and have learned quite a bit about the relationship between the mind and the immunity, the mind, the brain, and the endocrine system and the immunity. And it builds your resilience. There's some new research that has shown that contemplative practices can bring about rejuvenation, not just maintenance, but also, bringing back energy, youthfulness, reducing aging, for instance. This has been a topic of interest for quite some time now, at least in North America. There's a lot of interest in anti-aging. So mental practices can actually influence bodily changes. What comes to mind is this thing called telomeres. What are telomeres? These are essentially the ends of our chromosomes. These are the end caps that protect the chromosome. Remember, I mentioned in the beginning, chromosome are these structures in the nucleus. They contain our DNA. So right at your DNA level, at the molecular level, there are changes. Why? We don't know the exact mechanisms. It's still work in progress, but we know that telomere, the delay of telomere shortening is directly correlated with contemplative practices. We can delay this, and the consequences are that you have better health, and you can actually you can have a longer lifespan. Mental practices can influence bodily changes. As I mentioned, now new research, some of it published in the last 1 or 2 years, the effects of meditation on length of telomeres in healthy individuals, a systematic review. So not just 1 or 2 studies, there is quite a bit of work. Actually, meta-analysis of existing research shows that telomere length correlates with DNA methylation. This is one mechanism that we have understood, protecting the DNA molecule, protecting the risks associated with copying gone wrong, because DNA methylation is one way to protect the DNA structures in long-term meditation practitioners. So quite a bit of evidence on how meditation research has shown that individuals who regularly meditate had longer telomeres. So evidence that information doesn't stay in one domain, it transfers from your body, from a physical perspective, all the way to your experiences. We know quite a bit about how meditation research has shown people addressing some of their concerns regarding mental health. Not all, mental health is a larger domain. Contemplative practices could be useful. When we talk about mind-body interventions, what are the mechanisms involved? In this case, I'm just going to show you one example here, which is very well known and very well established. Example of vagus nerve. This is one of the 12 pairs of cranial nerve that we have. They originate in our brain, and it's part of the autonomic nervous system. You know, the automatic system that controls involuntary functions of the body. It is innervated throughout the vital organs, as shown on the picture on the right side. Actually, vagus stimulation through a variety of practices like yoga, like breathing or movement can stimulate and balance the nerve. How does it do? It works through parasympathetic innervation. Now, Dr. Shiv will describe this in further details in subsequent sessions. We'll give you live demos as well as provide you more evidence on how slow, deep breathing exercises can be of great relevance here. It may look like a simple process. It is very simple. But when you take these easy steps, you can activate and have a balanced autonomic nervous system, balancing the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Let's summarize and have a more conversational approach. Can we train our body, brain, and mind? The answer is yes. Where do you begin? Begin where you are, at whatever stage in your life, at whatever level. You can train your body, you can train your brain, you can train your mind. Body is the source and the destination. There is no philosophical eligibility that is needed here. If you like to discuss things, if you want to discuss how this happens, where are we heading, those are very much a possibility. But from a practical standpoint, from a stepwise process, we suggest, or I suggest, body is the source and body is the destination. Dr. Jivasu can explain these things in further detail. He has lots of experience on these topics, bringing back to us in a more systematic but actionable manner. Thank you for your attention. We can have a more conversational approach now.